Welcome to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome in to episode 29 of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. My name is Corey, and I am here with my actual brother, Justin.
Hello, this is Justin.
It's episode 29. Here we come. And Justin, we are getting closer and closer, and we are starting to taste the fantasy football playoffs. Many leagues are getting into it this week. Let's get things started by talking about some injury quick hits. What's going on with the two-star running backs, Christian McCaffrey and Joe Mixon?
Yeah, the news came out that McCaffrey is going to be playing this week. That's the expectation for week 14. If you squeaked your way into the playoffs, if you're close to getting to the playoffs, it'll be nice to have that guy back. And then Joe Mixon, eligible to return from the IR this week. Still no news on if he will be activated or not. Kind of surprising move putting him on IR back a couple weeks ago, but he is eligible to return, so we'll see what happens.
Justin, probably the fantasy football nightmare, the epitome of that happened this past weekend. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, active, but he didn't play. What's going on?
Yeah, it was one of those situations, right, where if you had Edwards-Helaire, you were going to play him, right? And unfortunately, the Chiefs played it close to the vest. They activated him, but they didn't play him. And Le'Veon Bell saw all the snaps out there with, Williams mixing in here and there, but yeah, it was a tough situation. He was battling a stomach bug. I guess had lost a bunch of weight last week, didn't practice. So the Chiefs played it safe with him. He should be good, though, to come back this week. The good news is that Bell didn't do very much of anything to harness any sort of additional work in that job. So I expect CEH to come back and grab that number one spot back this week.
Yeah, Bell looks slow, Justin, but one guy who never looks slow when he's on the field is Josh Jacobs. Missed last week. Is he going to miss another week with this injury?
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked about this last week, Corey, where the report came out that it wasn't as bad as they initially thought it was. Well, I guess it was, right? I mean, he was able to miss week 13, and there's actually already reports as we record this show on Tuesday night that he could potentially miss week 14 too. And if he does miss week 14, Booker's the play again, but not too excited about it, right? Booker had a great matchup. Week 13 did not harness that. Monitor reports on Josh Jacobs.
Yeah, Justin. I mean, maybe the situation is when they said, hey, it's not as bad as it looks. They were expecting it to be season ending, and instead it's just sort of week to week. I guess we'll see with Josh Jacobs. Definitely pay attention to the news there. Another bit of news that dropped recently is that Chris Godwin had those pins that he had removed from his fingers. Is that going to be a concern, Justin, for this week going into the fantasy playoffs?
Yeah, I think you got Godwin, right? You're playing him, right? I think he should be good to go here. A pretty routine procedure for him. I'd play him if I had him.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Justin. And now let's finish things up with probably one of the more tough injuries that still there's news trickling out about. And it was a part of our future segment from last week. Justin, what happened, unfortunately, with Antonio Gibson?
Yeah, Antonio Gibson, the young rookie running back for the Washington football team. He, went up against the Pittsburgh Steelers here on Monday Night Football. He was looking good, right? He had a couple carries. He had a nice 13, 14-yard scamper there, but then came up gimp. Toe injury for Antonio Gibson here. Initial reports are that it could be a turf toe injury, which is never good for running backs. Most likely he will not be playing this week. Could be potentially a multi-week injury. It may even see him sidelined for the rest of the season, man. Talk about unfortunate news there for the young back, but, I'm excited for his future, right? I mean, the arrow's pointing straight up. He was really taking control of that backfield. Washington seemed to really commit to him over the last couple weeks here. He was a touchdown machine like we've talked about. If he doesn't make it back for 2020, man, I'm looking really forward to seeing what he does in 2021. I think he's a top 12 dynasty running back at this point.
Yeah, Justin, he might fall into that category of guys who are good running backs, even though he was in a good situation. But last week we also talked about good running backs in bad situations. And, I talked about how last week, look, these guys have good upside. They really, really do. And we saw it with a couple of them, right? Devin Singletary put together his second straight pretty good game after having a bunch of stinkers in a row. We saw Melvin Gordon have an awesome game against Kansas City. He really looked really good in that game. And so now, Justin, we're in a situation where you can see what their upside is. And unfortunately, though, you have to realize that while it was good for the likes of Melvin Gordon and Devin Singletary this past week, the floor is low and it can be bad on a week-to-week basis, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, situation does matter, right? It's not all about talent, but looking at another guy, right? David Montgomery, who was, really struggled for the early part of the season here, but he's put two back-to-back great games together. And right now he's on track to be the highest scoring running back for week 13, man. His arrow's pointing straight up here as we head into the fantasy playoffs.
Agreed, Justin. And I guess we'll see how all these situations shake out. But otherwise, it's about that time. Let's get to it.
On today's show,
All right, we continue our weekly format for you this week. Today, Justin and I discuss a past, a present, and a future topic as we reflect on Week 13, the week that was, and get you prepared for your Week 14 matchups, whether you're trying to get into the playoffs or in it and ready to start fighting. Justin, why don't we get things started with a guy who has finally emerged as a fantasy football legitimate option?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about LA Rams rookie running back, Cam Akers. Man, where have you been all season, Cam? I miss you. This is what I thought you could be. It's a bit too little, though, too late at this point, Corey. You know, if you owned Akers this year, you probably end up spending a sixth-round pick on him back in August. He was a consensus top 5 or 6 pick in most rookie draft circles this season as well. And it's been a rough year, man, for Akers, right? The lack of trust that McVay had in him at the beginning of the season. He had that rib cartilage issue that sidelined him for a couple weeks. It's been a rookie season to forget, man, but over the last few weeks, the narrative has started to shift in Akers' favor. You look at Week 13, right? Akers paced the running back group there for the Rams with 21 carries. He had 72 yards on the ground. He had a touchdown. He also had a catch for 22 yards, so almost 100 total yards and a TD out of the young back. And this is now Akers' third straight game with a touchdown, right? And he also had the highest snap percentage of the year, coming in at 63%. Now, yes, Darrell Henderson, he did get banged up in this game. He had to check out, get his knee looked at, missed a couple series. But one of the most encouraging things was the lack of usage of Malcolm Brown during that time. And what was interesting was that he only played 13 snaps in this game. The other thing, too, was the goal line work, right? That's been Malcolm Brown's bread and butter this season for the Rams. And it was all Akers in Week 13, man. Now, you can recall in the preseason, I was a big fan of Akers. It's been frustrating, though, to own him this season. But we may be finally seeing the changing of the guard here in LA. Now, sometimes it takes rookies a little while to get up to speed, right? And people forget. Cam Akers was one of the youngest rookies, coming in at only 20 years old when the season started. Obviously, if you took him in a redraft league, this is a lost season, right? But in Dynasty, I'm encouraged by this trend, and if Akers can finish the season off strong, I see no reason why he wouldn't be considered the favorite to win this job next season in 2021.
So, Justin, posing a situation to you, let's say you're the Josh Jacobs, Antonio Gibson owner, and you also were able to grab Akers and you've basically just been sitting on him all year. Are you starting him with confidence, knowing that your running backs are down, or would you rather go with a waiver wire option like somebody like J.D. McKissic?
It's tough, man, right? Because you just don't know if you can totally trust McVay, right? We've seen Akers emerge and then get benched or not play as much as he normally should. It's difficult, man. I think if you're in a bind, right, and you're looking at your running back depth and you're in a bind, I think you have to throw Akers out there, given the fact that he's been playing more snaps, he's scoring. But would I be at all surprised if Malcolm Brown came out and led the backfield in snap share this week? I don't really know, man. It's a risky proposition to throw out there to think that you would feel totally comfortable starting Cam Akers here, especially in the playoffs when it's win or go home. Corey, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's definitely tough to trust, and it's something that I don't know. I would maybe skirt away from. It's another one of those situations where it's hard to imagine that the situation has been solved, but maybe it has. Maybe it was they just wanted to get him up to speed. But I guess another situation that was similar to this a few weeks ago was let's rewind the clock, Justin, maybe 5 or 6 weeks, and I'm telling you how Corey Davis is a pretty exciting waiver wire option to potentially consider. And wow, Justin, take out 1 3-target game where he posted a peculiar 0 points, and Corey Davis has scored PPR double digits in every game this year. You heard that right. Every game he played this year. Now, I felt sick having this guy as my Tennessee sleeper this year when we did our car ride to Maine segment. But here we are, and I don't feel sick at all. He's this year's Devontae Parker and is a must-start in 3 wide receiver leagues. It's the reemergence of a guy we've waited on for years, and we've really wanted to be a guy for many years now as he was a talented guy coming out of college. Justin, is this the real deal with Corey Davis, or is this just a guy who's lucking into some major fantasy production right now?
Yeah, Corey. I mean, maybe Corey Davis is just a better suited wide receiver too, right? Where the better coverage goes with A.J. Brown, and Corey Davis can reap the benefits of getting, the second in command there. We've been waiting for the last 4 seasons for Corey Davis to emerge. Corey, I was a fan of Corey Davis there going into his rookie season. He had the draft pedigree. He had that number one sort of stranglehold on the position for the Tennessee Titan wide receiver group. But I don't know, Corey. I mean, the production's been there all season. I think I'm willing to bite into it. I think I'm willing to believe that it is, in fact, the real thing here.
Yeah, heads up, everybody. Corey Davis is going to sign somewhere interesting this offseason. He's going to make you wonder, is Corey Davis worth drafting as a wide receiver too in fantasy next year? Get ready for those discussions, Justin, because it's going to happen. With that said, why don't we start talking about the present, Justin, and let's start talking about some fantasy options for potentially this week and beyond as we move into the playoffs. Why don't you get us started with a guy who has really sort of embraced opportunity with Will Fuller going down?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Texans wide receiver Keke Coutee. Now, we talked last week about Will Fuller being suspended through the end of the season here, and Coutee stepped up in a big way, man, for week 13. He took over that number 2 wide receiver role, and he performed pretty well. Now, he flashed in years past with Deshaun Watson, right? We remember back last year when he was another hot waiver wire pickup, and this week was no different. He had 8 catches for 140 yards against a pretty stout Indianapolis defense. Now, if I'm in need of a wide receiver, I'm prioritizing Coutee as a pickup for week 14. He has a matchup coming up against Buster Screen this week, who's been torched by opposing slot wide receivers this season. So on paper, the matchup looks really, really good. And I think he's an upside wide receiver 3 for week 13. And if I'm in a deep league starting, 3 wide receivers, 12, 14 team league where the waiver wire is pretty thin, man, he has to have a spot in that 3rd wide receiver role. And I'd feel pretty comfortable doing so.
Yeah, it's intriguing, and I'm not as intrigued by his talent, but opportunity matters. That's fantasy for you, and Keke Coutee could be an option.
Yeah, he could be a league winner. I mean, you just don't know, right? You always have those guys that emerge late in the season who, put up really great stat lines, and the opportunities there, man, especially when you have Deshaun Watson, one of the better quarterbacks in the league, throwing the ball to you. I'm taking the splash on Coutee, especially now these days with how barren the waiver wire is.
Justin, I'm going to take a splash on another guy, and this is a guy who I was really high on to start the summer and then fell way off on right before draft season. And that's one Mr. TY Hilton. Now, in perfect fashion, Justin, I'm back on the TY Hilton train because this past week, it was not lucky and it was not fluky. TY was a big part of this game plan early. And when we saw him, we saw a lot of the skills TY had in previous years. Now, I understand for many, this is kind of like the Cam Akers situation, right, Justin? He's already burned the bridge. But for me, I'm into this as a potential fantasy playoff asset. There's a good chance this guy has fallen into your free agency. And if you have fab left or you're interested in using a waiver wire claim right now that you've been saving on, I would consider it. I think it's a real possibility that TY was hurting early on and was handled with kids' gloves. Well, Justin, the gloves are off, and I'm intrigued and buying for a late season push from TY Hilton.
2 great back-to-back games, right? Touchdowns in both. He looked pretty good 2 weeks ago against Tennessee, right? The Colts did get down pretty big in that game, so they were forced to really throw the ball a lot towards the end of the game, which resulted in a lot of production for Hilton. But this past week against Houston, man, another good matchup for TY, and he came through again. They've got Vegas this week, and they've got Houston again next week. I think he's definitely intriguing. He's got the track record of production. Obviously, the first 9 or 10 weeks were not great. If you had TY Hilton, right, you were getting pretty sick looking at him on your bench, or maybe even starting if you had to. But it's a bold call, Corey. I think I'm leaning against the risk of starting a guy that's been a dud for the majority of the season. But you know what, man? T.Y. Hilton's done it before. He's a lotto ticket. He could put up a lot of game-winning weeks here.
Justin, if we saw this in week 1, what would we be saying? Like, rewind the clock and think about it. Let's say we saw this type of production, these past 2 games. We saw it in week 1, week 2. What would we be saying about T.Y. Hilton? Be honest, right?
Yeah, he'd be a wide receiver too. I think that he'd be consistently ranked around that probably 12 to 15 range, I think, weekly.
And that's exactly it, Justin. I'm in the same boat. He would be a wide receiver too, and we would be confidently starting him. I'm not saying that it's that. We can't ignore the first 11 weeks or so of the season, but we also can't dismiss these past 2. I'm really, really intrigued. Well, Justin, let's talk about the week that's coming up, and it's a week that is so, so important for fantasy purposes. And let's talk about a situation that it's not often where we get to week 14 and all of a sudden things are changing in offenses, but there's one big change coming in the city of brotherly love.
Yeah, man, it's been really ugly in Philadelphia this season, right? I mean, you look at Carson Wentz, he's looked lost this entire season, not reading the field well, holding the ball for way too long. He leads the league in turnovers, sacks allowed. It's just not good, man, right? It looked like he's lost all that confidence that he had. And, I'm not going to put it all on Wentz, though, right? Because the play calling and personnel usage has been just as bad and head scratching in some weeks. Now, in week 13, we finally saw Peterson bench Wentz and bring in the rookie Hurts. And from the moment that Hurts came on the field, man, in that second half, you could see the offense perk up, right? There was this renewed energy that Hurts brought to that offense. And Peterson has come out and said that he's going to start Hurts in week 14. I'm not saying it's an easy decision, though, man, for him, right? I mean, put yourself in Doug Peterson's shoes, right? You've got Wentz, who's the quote-unquote franchise quarterback, right? He's locked up to a long-term deal that he just signed this past offseason with a huge cap hit over the next couple seasons, right? The Eagles can't even get out of his contract without, I think it's like $50 million in dead cap money, which is absolutely crazy. So I see why Peterson waited and didn't immediately come out and proclaim that Hurts would start. But honestly, man, I'm happy that he did, because as a fantasy player, as an owner of Eagles, Hurts should provide a nice bump to that offense, right? You look at Wentz, he has really stalled this offense the entire season, and I'm looking for that spark, man, right? Anything's better than what they had going on. From looking at the offensive skill players, like, Ertz is back now. You got Goddard, you got Rager, you even got Jeffrey, Miles Sanders. I'm encouraged with the switch in the offensive scheme, man. I think Hurts offers a different sort of quarterback, a different sort of mindset with the ability to scramble. Defense will have to play the Eagles a bit differently here. I'm encouraged, man, by the change.
I'm fascinated with what this might mean, Justin, especially for the future of this organization. Let's say things work out with Hurts, and let's say this is a situation where these last few weeks end up playing out really, really well for them. What happens, right? What happens in that situation? I think it might be interesting. They might not be able to find a team that'll chew up all of Wentz, but they'll definitely be able to find a team, I don't know, off the top of my head, the Chicago Bears, who might be like, look, we don't have the answer here on our team. Let's chew up some of the cap that Wentz is going to get. We won't take it all, but we'll take some of it from Philly, and he'll move to a different situation. I don't think Wentz is completely cooked. This is a really rough situation, but I'm with you. I think it's Hurts' time, and I think it's really, really interesting to see what this could do for this offense, Justin.
Yeah, I think it's the right call. If Peterson came out and didn't start Hurts this week, man, I feel like his head would have been on a stake here in Philadelphia, man. They were just yelling and screaming for a change at the quarterback position.
Yeah, I agree, Justin. Well, here's a situation that needs some analysis, too. What's going on with my man, Tyler Lockett? Now, the Seattle offense is a shell of the juggernaut that it was early on in the season, but it's regained its footing a little bit. It ain't perfect, but it's definitely better. In my eyes, I'm wondering if we were duped early on, Justin. Was Lockett's fast start to this year a mirage? This seems like an offense that could easily support two top-tier wideouts. But since week 3, consistency has been lacking for Lockett. You typically don't want someone in your lineup who has a better chance of busting than booming. And since week 3, it's been a majority of busts. And not just a little bit of a majority, but a pretty big amount. Justin, is this guy making it right now on name recognition from early on? Should he lose his wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 tag at this point?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, right, where it's unfortunate for Lockett because he's a super talented wide receiver, but the offense is funneling its targets, especially Russell Wilson, through DK Metcalf at this point. I mean, he's become the alpha number 1. Lockett, I think better days are ahead for Tyler Lockett. He's just too damn talented not to be successful, but the volatility may always be there, man, for this young wideout. He's a very talented young wide receiver, but I think he's more of a low-end wide receiver too until he can string together a couple decent games.
I got to agree with you, Justin. I mean, let's call a spade here. And Tyler Lockett is nothing more than Deshaun Jackson when, he was sort of at his premium boomer bust. And that's the situation we're in. And that's no better than a low-end wide receiver, too, on its best day. And until we see otherwise, I think Tyler Lockett is somebody who you have to be very cautious with at this point. If he's got you to where he is, maybe you got to start him. But, boy, you got to know the ride is not going to be pretty. But there we go, Justin. There's our Week 14 show for the 2020 season. It's now in the books. And next week, we will continue our weekly seasonal episodes. We're going to recap Week 14 and get you ready for Week 15. Hopefully, you're playing in that week. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell. Download, follow, like, comment, and whatever else you have to do to show some support. I'm Corey.
And I'm Justin.
And this has been the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. We'll see you next week.
Royalty-free music courtesy of The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.